Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Human SOS Show. Glad that you will be with us today, spend about an hour with us. And I think we're going to have an interesting topic today. And as we try to always, but I think this one will especially be interesting. Just remind you to be sure and type in where you're joining us from, and so that we know where you're joining. And also, be sure to ask questions, make comments, because your engagement makes the show a lot better. So, Anton, you want to roll out our topic for today?
Good morning, everybody. Just starting out, Human SOS Show as a reminder is basically what me and Kevin are doing to try to make a little bit of an impact on the way society works and lives, and it stands for human operating, humanly sustainable operating system, and it has three components. It focuses on health, it focuses on life, and it focuses on work. And we can work with companies, HR companies, or HR departments, or just in general small startups to help create better employee experience, manage stress, and things like that. But this show focuses on just talking about those kind of topics. And today we're talking about life. Last week we talked about health. So one of the biggest things to do with that, with life, is our identity, right? Who we are and kind of what we've cemented ourselves into being. And I'll start out this with a small story about myself that makes me talk about this topic often. I grew up in Ukraine. For those of you who don't know, I was there for the first 13 years. And back home, we lived in these big apartment buildings, right? Really, really big apartment buildings. That's what everybody kind of did. Not many houses around for the most part. That's what people did. And in the US, people call that the projects. I mean, that's basically the whole country was like that. So I don't know if we call it the projects, but it was in where I lived. There was a bunch of kids that we all played in the yard. And it was either all kids that were older than me or all kids that were way younger than me. I got an unfortunate age where there was only one kid that was around my age, and he ended up moving to like Siberia when we were young. I was like, well, that sucks. So it really made me hang out with the older kids. And from a very early age, I tried to be like them. I tried to be what they wanted me to be. I tried to be the funny kid. I tried to be the brave, daring kid. But basically just doing what they wanted me to do so I could fit in. And I feel like from that point forward, for many, many years in my life, I always try to follow that kind of process. I try to fit in by molding myself or becoming a chameleon to the environment that I'm in. And I became good at it. I was a popular kid in high school when I moved to Ukraine because I wanted to become like an American. I wanted to fit in as much as I could and all these different things. And the reality is, I was miserable. I was unhappy. I was ineffective as a human being overall because I didn't have any solid ground to stand on. I didn't have that deep rooted foundation within me of who I was. And not until later years in life, after military, after some usually stuff happens in your life when you figure out who you are. And some things happened in my life that brought me to a point where I said, you know what? This is who I am. This is what I'm going to grow into. Maybe I'm not fully there. Maybe I'm not this definition of it perfectly yet, but at the roots, I have to plant my roots somewhere, right? And it brought me to this idea of, and I love oak trees. If you never heard me talk about oak trees, it's one of my favorite things. My son's name is Oakley. My first consulting company was Oak Tree Consulting. And it's because of what it symbolizes. It symbolizes this strong, immovable object, something that's rooted deep into itself. And what we do as a society, we often act as tumbleweeds instead of oak trees. And what I mean by that is a tumbleweed grows very rapidly. It feels amazing to grow in that way. But then next season comes, it dies and it blows into a different direction, plants seeds somewhere else, and it does that all over again. This is what many people in our society do on a regular basis. And that has to do with, and I'm looking around, a self help book somewhere around here, but a lot of self help books, right? We are the book of the month kind of people. We've become where we read this new book and we try to become that thing. And we're like a tumbleweed, right? We ran over to a different place. We read that book. Now we're very fastly growing and it feels great, but it's never rooted truly in who we are. We really haven't decided who we are. And instead, we should be oaks that rooted themselves, planted themselves, and we expand and grow above ground. We expand and grow through our leaves and our branches versus our roots.
Yeah, it's a tough one, and I love the analogy of tumbleweeds. That's a good one, and the idea of the kind of the self help craze of the moment and becoming that as part of what we are, and yeah, that creates a problem because we end up chasing visions of other people rather than finding our own and investing in that person and uh, learning about that person. And what the other thing that we do culturally is we define ourselves by our titles, our positions, um, our education, even. And I think those are all problematic because those are based on externals, not on internals. Now, sometimes we, based on our internals, we find the right spot and get into a role that fits us. But most times we got it backwards. We are getting roles and trying to define ourselves by those roles and those titles and positions. And it's a problem because when you're basing it on those titles and roles, for example, and you lose your job, it's devastating because your identity's tied up in that, and those things change. If your identity is tied up in being rich and having lots of money, something happens, economy goes south, and you lose all your money, and at that point your identity's gone. And it's just because we are looking in the wrong places and to find out what our identity is. And there are markers and components there that we need to consider as in searching out our identity. Let me give a shout out to Mary and Sharon and Zaid. Glad to have y'all this morning. Appreciate you being here as always, and love to hear from you. So, yeah, I think we have a cultural identity crisis. Would that be a fair statement, you think, Anton?
I don't think I don't think it's something new. I think that's something that's been ongoing for
Mm.
many years.
Oh, yeah.
Reason why there is a midlife crisis exists. How we, how it materializes today is maybe a little bit different than it was
Mm.
100 years ago. But at the same time, it exists because what you're talking about. We keep trying to build our identity through external things. We keep trying to chase things from outside in, hoping that, we accomplish something on the outside, we create something on the outside, and somehow it's going to fulfill us on the inside or build us on the inside. And don't get me wrong, trials and tribulations, of course, externally, they do build us on the inside. But there's just one really key thing, and that's reflection. It's
Mm.
really, if you do go through those trials and tribulations, you need to come back inside. Always come back inside. You can't build from outside in. You have to build from the inside out. And I'm not saying that, titles and the things that Kevin's talking about are important. They are very important, but they're not something that is solid. Just like you said, they can be taken away. And I told you something bad happened to me that, really shook me and made me realize who I was. And I was losing a job. That was being fired from a role that I was in and moved into a different role within the same company. But it just rocked my world because all I did was give to this company, define myself through the successes there. And it's easy to get caught up in that, right?
Mm.
It's anything. Like whatever is the successes in your life tend to define who we are.
Mm.
That's just how it is. It's easy to attach to that. It's easy to run with that. But I'm going to argue that we shouldn't. I'm going to argue that maybe it's a component of who we are, but once again, it's not stable. Something that who we are should be much more stable. Should be like
Mm.
it's like a root of an oak tree planted. Um, so it's not new, but definitely materializes in different ways. The advice that I have for people is spend some time understanding what those key things on the inside are, right? Define yourself in a way, but try to do it in a way that it's like a strategy versus a tactic, right? Strategies are very long term. They're existing for a really long time. Me and you used to talk about this many God, a couple of years ago now, but
Mm.
having a vision that's longer than your lifespan, right?
Mm,
Something that is so long, that's like a long-term, really long-term strategy. We'll have the same thing for your identity. Find things that you want to grow into, find things that you want to cement yourself in that are much longer than just a few years. And there's one that I'm going to say is controversial. And being a parent can become too much of our identity,
mm,
where we live for our kids, we do everything for our kids, we feel like we have to reproduce and advance. Yes, that's part of what we do and maybe a part of who we are, but it's not everything. It's just a small component. And I see this happen all the time. I've worked with a lot of folks, coached a lot of folks that get out of the parenting phase, and that's when the midlife crisis really
mm,
hits, because they don't know who they are after that. My kids have moved out. It's just me and my wife. Sometimes divorces happen at that point.
mm-hmm.
Sometimes people just really fall apart because they've just defined themselves mostly through that. And that's that easy one. That's the success one. You feel like, oh, I'm seeing this girl, I'm seeing this person become a better version of themselves and becoming better than me. And it's an easy one to attach to. But it's just a fragment of who you are. It's not everything of who you are. So don't over index on it.
Well, one of the key things is we evaluate our identity. We ask, observe, is anything that we consider identity that is an external is likely not a healthy identity. Doesn't mean that it's not something we do that's valuable or any of that. It's just that if that defines us, it can be affected outwardly. And who we are should be driven inwardly because that doesn't change, generally speaking. And finding that and seeking it out becomes a point of time. And I believe that it goes beyond just simple knowledge. We've got to dig in, we've got to find more about us. And the one thing that makes that a challenge is that when we do this by ourselves without any inputs from other sources outside of ourselves, we miss blind spots and we miss understanding. And what I encourage people, if you're going to really go on this journey, you need to get a lot of different inputs or information to go consider and really evaluate. And one of them that's going to be a factor, we can we can deny it, we can wish it weren't so, we can uh, even say that'll never be us, but our family. At the end of the day, we are a product of our family, both biologically, circumstantially, environmentally. We are a product of our family, also spiritually. There are principles at work. And so, one of the ways to help in this journey of understanding our identity is to look at family. There is a tool out there that is helpful in this, and I know that counselors and psychologists will use them. It's called a genogram. And we have family trees and research our ancestry and all that, and that's interesting and it's worthwhile. But going beyond just the name and birth date and place that you were born or they were born, but look into, and this is hard, but find out from your family, what were these people like? How did they respond to life? Were they happy or sad or whatever? And try to learn some of those things, because that's going to give us insight into us. And it's a great way to really begin to understand. And doesn't mean that we are doomed to repeat the those things, but we certainly need to understand the influence. And if it's something that we should grow from and out of, then the first step is to know that it's there and accept it. I know One of the things we have to be very careful with in looking inwardly and doing evaluation is to see something or someone and say, I will never do that or be like that, because we are, by doing that, setting up an emotional focus that will almost surely guarantee that we will be or do that, if not in action, in attitude. And it can impact us negatively if we're not careful. And so, yeah, use some tools. And that includes finding people that you really connect with and that are honest enough to tell you the truth. And they, one of the things that people will remind me of, and it's not designed to be hurtful, but I am, well, one way to put it is I'm a very determined person. My family says I'm hard headed, but either way, it's an attribute that's there. Is it always good? Not necessarily. Is it part of me? Very much so. And learning how to accept that and be able to then grow and develop related to that. Uh, Welcome, Tushar. Glad to have you here this morning. So yeah, we need to, as Anton said, we've got to do some work to understand and look inwardly to evaluate and begin to help us figure out what is our true identity.
You know, feedback is a gift. I've always said that it's hard to get
Mm.
in both ways. It's hard to get because it's hard to take, and it's also hard to get because people are nowadays are not as willing to really do that because people
Hmm.
are cautious. They don't want to hurt feelings and things like that. So it definitely is a gift. But ask yourself, right? And I'm asking all of you, when was the last time you asked somebody about yourself as a human being?
Mm.
Sat down and had a conversation just to hear them out, not guided anyway, but just saying, who do you think I am? Right? What kind of things do you see me do? What's great about me? What's not so great about me? And really got some honest feedback. It will open your eyes. I haven't had that done in a few years. I actually need to do it again. But it's something that we should be doing regularly.
Hmm.
Our view of ourselves is very often skewed. Some of it is skewed in a positive way, some of it is skewed in a negative way. It just depends on who you are and what your environment is. But speaking of environment, your other point on parents, I feel like most of us spend majority of our life either trying to become like them or become not like them. Right? We're running to or from that concept, but it's just we're wired that way as a society. I mean, when you talk about personalities and who we are, majority of that is set, I believe 85% of it is set by the age of 7,
Mm.
if I remember correctly. So that's a very easy thing to do. We talk about this in self-help books. You become the average of the people you're surrounded by, right? So if by age of 7, 85% have said of you, who are the people that you're around? Usually it's your parents, it's your
Mm.
family. That's what it is. Now that's not to say you can't change it. It's just harder, right? Like it
Hmm.
becomes harder. And when it comes down to parenting, for example, um, I'm a little bit, different from some of my friends who are very directed with their kids. They're kind of, really hover over them, make sure they're safe, make sure they don't get hurt, make sure their feelings are protected. This thing where I'm going to go there, but it's fine if you don't agree with me. But this thing where we protect our kids' mental health by protecting them from being hurt, by protecting them from facing challenges in life. Like we're not helping their mental health.
Hmm.
We're hurting their mental health from their identity standpoint. We're telling them they can't fight their own battles. We're telling them that they need the protection of their mothers, their fathers, whatever, their schools in order to survive. And that sets who they are. And we're struggling as a world so badly with mental health. I've just been
Mm.
talking about it all month. It's on my mind. But the reality is we're causing that problem. That's just my opinion. I'm not a psychologist, not a psychiatrist, just a person that loves people and observes people. So with my kids, I let them figure things out on their own. I let them screw up. I let them make mistakes. And I'm very, very much a hands-off person because I want them to not just be like me. I want them to be like them. And I want them to experience more of the world than just myself when they're setting 85% of that of who they are.
Yeah, one of the defining concepts of our current culture, and it has been started, unfortunately, with my generation. We're hold a lot of responsibility for it, but this protective bubble that we feel necessary with our children has become a problem, and it's to a point that it's actually harmful. We, at the end of the day, we know that life is going to be full of challenges. There's going to be adversity. And if we keep protecting our children, grandchildren, from experiencing that and learning how to deal with it, we're going to create more people that are struggling and in pain mentally and emotionally. And it's really not a healthy way to do things. And so important that we guide our children uh, in the direction of themselves and not a repeat of me, or not a replacement of me so that I can try to live my, uh, overcome my mistakes through them. That's not the way we do it. And it has become a real problem. Before I forget, welcome Sheeta and Marius and Rick. Glad to have you guys. But we've got to begin to help our young people develop character. You know, one of the challenges, I'm in workforce, do a lot of work in workforce, and one of the problems that we have is that we have a lot of current younger workforce that have not been given character or help to gain character rather than learning it academically. And by taking, by not overprotecting, we allow our children to experience and to find out what they're like. You know, let them try doing something, and if they realize they get very frustrated, it's an insight into who they are. And then we can help guide them and certainly teach them, but it's not our role to make them into something that we wanted to be or should have been or whatever. It's to help them find their identity based in who they're created to be, not based in what we're trying to overcome in our own lives or whatever. And I know I have a perspective on bullying, and one thing make very clear: I do not like bullying, and if I see a someone bullying someone else, I'm going to be the first one in the middle of it to deal with the bully. That notwithstanding, the best way that we can help our children become, if you will, bully proof is if they've got a degree of character and their identity is clear for them, then the bullying isn't going to be a factor because we can dismiss it knowing that it's not based accurately. And one of the things about a bully, if they don't get a rise out of you or the response they want, eventually they're going to tire. They're just looking for an easy form of entertainment at your expense. And when we don't give them the entertainment, it fades. And so, allowing our children to find their identity with guidance. Again, it's our job as parents to help guide them into it. But when they can establish their identity wisely, then they have a much better chance of not only surviving our current culture but thriving in it. When we find where our identity is, find what our identity is, and can begin to develop and live in that, boy, that's remarkable. It is freeing beyond belief. It keeps us from being driven by our circumstances, by people in our lives that come and go, that even try to hurt us. And so it is just It is such a key that we find out and understand and appreciate and accept our identity. It is such an important part. Welcome, Lee. Glad to have you.
Let's talk about a little bit. It's about setting our identity, right? About really getting to the root of who we are and what we want to be and things like that. Running with the analogy, we keep talking about, being a strong oak, kind of that deep rooted being into who we are and finding it from within. Think of it as right now for most of us, the soil for that oak is external factors.
Mm,
How much we feel we grow is based on things outside of us. It's what feeds us, it's what provides us nutrients, it's what makes us happy, excited, whatever. But how can we find ways to make the soil be what's inside of us, not what's outside of us? And it starts with just a very fundamental concept that many of us struggle with. Just society nowadays is built that way. But it has to start with the idea that you are enough. You
mm,
are more than enough. Right. And I like falling back on my faith at this point
mm,
because I'm building an image of God. How can I not be enough? Right. He
mm,
loves me. Who cares what everybody else thinks? Right. And I'm saying like it's easy. Trust me, it's not easy. It's just I think that's just that permanent thing that you can always fall back on and remember that no matter what, he got me. I am here because of him. Like I may have tough days, but I am enough. You may screw up. We know that. We're told we're going to screw up, but that's okay. Right. And if you can understand that foundation and start from that foundation, then the decisions that you make, then the, introspective that you find and really find through reflection becomes foundational versus just something that's a passing thought that changes tomorrow, as I said, because of a next self-help book that you read. Right. I'm not saying self-help books are bad, but think of it as just adding a little pieces versus changing the foundation. Right. Think of it as building a house. You need to build the foundation. You need to set the framework. What kind of window you install, what kind of kitchen countertop you put in, those are the self-help books. Those are the little small nuances of who you are, but they are not who you are at the bone. So it starts with that idea of you are enough.
well, and that's why I developed a quote that goes to this issue. We are created with great value, and that's intrinsic from our Creator. And we didn't do anything to earn it, so we can't lose it. Someone else didn't give it to us, so others can't take it away. And our Creator gives it to us and will not take it away because the character that is our Creator. And when we can truly latch on to that and and live with it with conviction, part of what I have begun to revisit is an old term, and that's having conviction. We talk about having values and things, and that's great and necessary. But at the end of the day, it is our convictions that determine our behaviors. And a conviction is something that um, one of the ways I look at it is that you believe it so much and depend on it so much that if it turned out not to be true, you would be wrecked. And that's the power of a conviction. And I think that we need some basic convictions in our life. And quite often it comes through spiritual pursuit and faith. But we, at the end of the day, need those convictions because that's how we can be anchored. When we have those convictions, those are things that don't change with circumstances. They don't change because we lose a job or lose a friend. One of the things is if we define ourselves solely by people around us and we lose those people to death or whatever, it can totally devastate us to a point that we can't function. And that's why it's so critical that our identity is wrapped up internally with who we're created to be and with the value that comes with that. And and when we have conviction about our value as a human being, and this is not a faith thing, it is just a fact. When we can accept our value as a human being as being priceless, and that we are all equally valuable, and we can then begin to be free to then develop into who we are, what we are, all of those things. And it just, the reality of that, it's just so freeing. As I know I'm saying the same thing over and over, but I see a lot of people that are still slaves to what people think, what happens around them, what their roles and titles are, because they haven't come to terms with the value they already have and have no need to prove themselves to anyone from a value standpoint. Um, Hello, Rosemary. Glad to have you. It's been a while. We appreciate you hanging in late in the evening from Australia. Let's see. Marius has a comment here. I am a child of God, and my children are children of God. That confidence in Him makes all the difference in our identity and our confidence in the Holy Spirit that guides us. Yes, recognizing that we are created by God and all that goes with that, and the value that we're endowed with. That's just so powerful. I can't reiterate that enough. Anton, thoughts?
It's interesting. I mentioned the word feedback, and feedback is tough to get sometimes, as I mentioned.
Mm,
But it's pretty cool because you can self-assess when you have some strong foundation to come from, right? So if you're using being a child of God as a foundation, which is a good one, you got the Bible as a guiding principle to self-assess,
mm.
right? You can come back to the good book and see, how am I doing? How am I doing on this path? That's not always possible. So I think it's a really good foundation to have, is being able to fall back on being a child of God, and using the guidance that the Bible's provided on how we need to live our lives.
Yeah, outside information is helpful. And again, some other tools that can give us bits and pieces are various temperament assessments and personality typing. Those are helpful tools as well. But uh, the best is that you find people that love us enough to be honest with us. And by the way, if this helps any, if you truly love somebody and care about them, you're willing to be honest with them, because love is not about always saying nice things and being kind and all that. That's a part. Please don't misunderstand. Being kind is such a critical part, but love also has a component or a balancing characteristic called truth. And we've talked about this before, about radical candor and the value of that. And it is truly a way to love someone is to be honest with them. And it has to be in context. People that feel like it's their job to be uh, candid with everyone over everything, sometimes that's because they have a problem and not because they're trying to be helpful or loving, I assure you. But certainly something that we need to be aware of is, if there are times that Anton and I will look at each other and say, are you really going to do that? Or do you think that, or sometimes we just say, that's kind of a stupid thing to do. And that's because we have a close connection, have a relationship based in love, to be able to say those things, because we truly care about each other. And when you have people in your life like that, and by the way, that doesn't always just happen. Sometimes it's a matter of seeking it out. But there's great value in doing that and making that effort as part of this going on. Let's see. Lee has a question, and Lee says, "Do convictions change when one attains wealth or power, or does it get exposed?" Uh, I would say that it getting circumstances that are outside of the average or norm tends to expose rather than change. I think it really accentuates. And that can be something that is considered good. It can be something that is considered bad. Some people say you get wealth and power, you've gotten something good. But if it exposes a deficit or a character flaw in you, then you got a whole different set of problems. What do you think on that one, Anton?
It depends on how those convictions were set, right?
Mm.
If those convictions were set, it's kind of what we talked about this whole time. If they were set from external factors, when the external factors change, so will the convictions,
Mm.
right? That's just how it is. If that person set their convictions before wealth internally and they were done the right way and they're fed, the soil is from who they are internally, then that money or power shouldn't change it. It should grow their impact. It should grow their ability to influence. It should grow their ability to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. But it shouldn't change who they are because those are just external factors.
Mm. Yeah. And I will tell you, as being in a season of life where I'm seeing the results of age, things like that, uh, beware that as you age, you're going to find out more about who you truly are as a result of age, especially if you deal with some of the age diseases of either Alzheimer's or dementia. What happens is with that, the result of not having as accurate a memory and especially short term, you get to a point where you don't filter stuff and you don't cover things about yourself. You get people get to see you as you really are, and if your foundation is not really solid, it's not a pretty picture. I've known many people that deal with aging parents that that begin to really become or become unfiltered in their what they do, and it's not pretty. People, I heard of people with their parents get angry at them and are very vicious towards them, and all kinds of things. So, at some point, it may come out. Better to find out about it now and grow into it than to shield it and filter it out always. Just a thought. Welcome, Ed Mario. Um, Appreciate you being here. And let's see what is Said says. Never know. Sometime those stupid things could be the next big thing. Yeah, and our culture of changing day to day, who knows? It could be, indeed. Anton, other thoughts on ways to find and understand our identity?
Absolutely. It's more set, right? I like to use the word set because when we find, once again, a lot of times it's trying to seek something that's already within us, but it's defined maybe is another word.
Mm.
Um, it's an exercise that I've coached many people on over the years. It requires sometimes some checking in with it. Has all the components that we kind of talked about. Um, Go out and spend a day in solitude by
Mm.
yourself, preferably in nature. I'm a fan of encouraging that where you disconnect from the present world. We
Mm.
want as little external influence during this day as possible. It's something that is all coming from it within. Don't even dive right into the exercise. Just spend some time, by yourself, and then as maybe a couple hours have passed, then dive in and once you've kind of centered and grounded yourself, but write down all the different components of who you are, what you want to be, all those kind of things, and really run them through the lens of like almost like trying to filter out all the external noise that has happened over the years, whether it be from your parents, from your friends, from society, from whatever, and really sitting down there identifying, is this truly what I want? Is this who I really want to be? Or is this something that has been put in my head by somebody else and made me want to be that way? So, and then define maybe 5 to 8 different components of who you are, right? Like I said, parent may be a part of your identity. Like that's such a long part of our life, but it's only one of those 5 to 8 components. What are some other things in there? Sit down and think about all those different things. For me, they're going to include things like health, right? I'm a healthy person. That is something that is part of my identity. I am a constant learner. That's another part of my identity. I'm a person that's trying to make an impact specifically with stress in this life. I've been talking about this show or even before this for years. It's not changing. It's not going away. Not because it's the hot topic. I've been talking about stress since I was 16 years old when it wasn't even a conversation that people were having. It's so deep inside me because my dad died from not taking care of himself and too much stress. It became part of who I was and part of how I wanted to impact the world. So spend that day really identifying, what those components are, and then define what you want them to look like. Define what that perfect situation, where you want to get with it, where you want to be with that component. And that doesn't mean externally, it just means internally, how you want to feel about it. And then find a quote that maybe represents that component and write all this down. Write this down like a plan. It's like a strategy that you're writing out, like a business sits down and writes out a high level strategy. You're doing that for yourself. And those quotes help us to connect emotionally. The strategy and the steps help us to connect logically. And we're able to kind of come in holistically and take that approach. And then check in into that plan regularly. Check in and say, what have I done to progress there? What have I done have I gone backwards? Have I gone forwards? Usually spend at least, a few hours every year checking in, but check in monthly for 15 minutes, right? Maybe check in weekly for 5 minutes and just scan and go, how did I stay on track with being who I am? Am I grounded in that, or I keep shifting back and forth because society or self-help books are forcing me to shift?
One of the things that I suggest to people is to consider defining moments. One of the observations I've made, and I especially target men on this, that we are quite often stuck at a point in our life emotionally, and to a point that we will behave emotionally from that point without even realizing it or understanding that it is there. And if you go and look back in your life, and are there moments that at years down the road are still like a clear movie rolling in your head? And I know as I went through a time of having to grow and understand my identity, part of my identity was not a good thing. It was affecting me and I was stuck. And it was actually going back to a time in my life at about probably 12 years old. And there is scenes that, and even today, I can remember the scene and it'll play in my mind as clear as if it happened this morning. And so look at those defining moments in our life. And if those affected us emotionally, what was the effect? And what we find is quite often that we are still responding in from that point in our life. In other words, I found that I was responding emotionally at the place that I was at 12 years old. And that's not a healthy place for an adult. We're all going to be 12 years old and deal with those things. But if we're stuck there, it affects our identity, keeps us from truly growing into our identity rather than being stuck by aspects of it. And so really consider, are there defining moments in your life, and dig into it and figure out, what are they? How did they impact you? Because you may be emotionally stuck there. And it's such an important thing. Let's see here. We've got a couple of comments. Marius makes comment that reading the Bible every day strengthens our identity and confidence in God, Jesus, and Holy Spirit. The more we read, the more conviction and guidance we receive in all the ways. I would suggest that one of the things I like about the Bible, well, a couple of things. One, there's a lot of wisdom there. Doesn't matter if you agree with it from a standpoint of faith, a lot of wisdom there. And from my perspective, it's the ultimate self-help book. If you really are into that, it's a great way to do self-help. Thoughts on that one, Anton?
Of course. I mean, it's like I said, it provides us constant feedback. It's an assessment in a way too, and it reinforces as a guiding principle of what we should be doing. That's why, leaders, great leaders. Somebody's talking about leadership with, like, Mario, but great leaders are, amazing like that. They connect to who we are, they connect to our soul, and then they provide some guiding principles for us to follow. And it makes things simpler instead of living in constant doubt of what I should do, who I should be. Here it is. It's outlined for you. Go ahead and follow.
Yep. And part of being an effective leader, and this is a problem with why we have a lack of leadership, is the confidence and acceptance of ourselves in order to be able to accept others, rather than making them into something different, or worse than that, trying to make them exactly like us. That's a really sad place to be in our life. And I've got to answer Zaid's question here. Uh, he sees the peach on my shirt. And no, it's not my identity. I voted this morning, and they always give us a sticker that says I voted. And no, yeah, I live in Georgia, but I'm me wherever I am. So thanks for asking,
I was
Zaid.
wondering that too, so I'm glad you asked, Zaid.
Yeah, no, it's just I voted this morning, and I would encourage everyone who is a citizen to exercise your responsibility as a citizen and vote your conscience in that regard. So let's see. Ed Mario says, "Person most qualified to lead is not the physically strongest person. She is the smartest, the most cultured, the most creative, most innovative, and there are no hormones for these attributes." Yeah, qualification for leadership is not about physical strength. Not always. Sometimes it's a factor, because if you've got a rock to move, and it's good to have a leader that's physically strong and can help you move uh, the rock, but that is not the end all send all. In fact, the ultimate is about our character, and in fact, it's about our ability to understand our identity and live it without trying to enforce it on other people. Um,
Um, yeah, let's talk about that. I think next week, I think that can be our topic of discussion for next week is qualifications of a leader.
okay.
It's we have to take a bigger view than what's right in front of our noses sometimes, as you're
Mm-hmm.
pointing out, Kevin. It's sometimes you do need strength to lead. It depends on what the situation we're in right now. A leader has to adjust to the environment that they're in and provide what is needed. Sometimes some people can't provide that. They just simply are not capable. Some people can shift and adjust, and Kevin talks about different styles of leadership. Sometimes you need to be that strong, commanding kind
Mm-hmm.
of individual. That's not gender specific. That's not what I'm saying. It's not hormone based necessarily, but there's certain qualities that will work in certain situations. There's certain qualities that work in others. We have been in a place as a society where things have been very good from a standpoint of economics, wars here in America and really most of the world. That's not true for everybody. If you compare leadership qualities in a war-stricken environment comparing to the US, they're going to be very, very different, incredibly different. And we've over-indexed on what we see in our life today as the right qualities for it. No, they're the right qualities for where we are today. That may change tomorrow, and so will those qualities. So just I urge everybody to be careful when saying like these are the perfect qualities for leadership. Sure, for this moment. When the
Mm.
moment changes, so should the qualities.
And in fact, Ed Mario makes another comment. It was actually before the one I just read. Is that leadership requires a lot of knowledge and wisdom. Excuse me. To lead is to persuade without imposing, to give an opinion without commanding. But the leader's differential is the ability to do all of this. Key word there. Okay, we can have all the knowledge of being a leader in the world, but if we lack wisdom, we're going to fail and we're going to harm those that we're leading. Wisdom has to be a part of it, needs to be a part of our entire life, but it has to be a part for a leader because there are not enough books to cover every situation we're going to lead in, and that's where wisdom becomes so very critical.
But let's cover. I think that's a good topic. We'll talk about that next week, and Mario, bring those comments next week, and let's deep dive into qualities of a leader, and we can use that as a topic for next week.
Well, I didn't realize my sticker was going to create such interest, but Rosemary was asked, "What did I vote for?" It's our state elections and local elections. We're voting for the governor of our state and also our local leadership, as well as our one of our U.S. Senate positions. So part of that election cycle for us. So thanks for asking, Rosemary. And the big thing I voted for is my convictions and finding people that are closely aligned with those. So um, let's see. Rosemary also makes comment that willingness and humility is also required in leadership, without a doubt. I even go so far to say that someone that's in a leadership role that's not a servant leader, I question whether they're a leader at all. They may be a manager, they may be other things, but to me, a true leader has to be a servant leader. If they're not, then they're there are a whole other host of challenges and issues, indeed. And so, identity, keep peace. I would say, Anton, that's kind of one of the foundational issues. Period. And if we're not addressing that, everything else is going to be shaky. What do you think? Is it that big a deal?
Yeah, of course, it absolutely is. We've talked about confidence, we've talked about mental health, we've talked about stress management. Identity ties into every single one of those
Mm,
things. If you don't have a set identity, your mental health is constantly strained because you're
mm,
never going to feel like you're enough. You're always going to be chasing somebody else's dream, somebody else's vision of what's good and what's defined as, the good life or whatever. You're always going to have issues with stress because you're inefficient as a human being.
mm.
You're going to create problems for yourself by not having a set identity. Your leadership is going to be flawed because you just it's hard to lead an inconsistent, hard to be led by an inconsistent person.
Mm.
We talk about these great qualities, and I'm not arguing with any single one of them. I think all the qualities you folks have mentioned, they're absolutely vital. But if those qualities keep changing day in and day out, your team walks in, they have no idea what they're walking into. You can have
Hmm.
all the right intentions, you can have all the right ideas, but if that's inconsistent, you can't have a highly performing team with an inconsistent leader. And if you don't have a set identity, you will be an inconsistent leader.
Well, and one of the things that I've always said, if people are clear in their identity and they're living it, it may be something that I don't necessarily agree with or prefer, but I have learned to respect it because then I know going into any situation with that person, I know where I stand and where we stand, and that's a even in disagreement, that's reassuring because it takes the guesswork out of it. We're not always wondering, am I going to have a problem of this related to this person? Because we have an idea, good or bad, and that's the value, and that's where part of confidence comes from is for ourselves having that understanding about ourselves, that we can be uh, predictable in our own right for our own selves and for others. And that's just such key. And have a good night's rest there, Rosemary. I know it's getting late in Sydney, but thanks for making the effort. But yeah, identity, folks. If we can settle that and find an understanding of our identity to a point that we can base live conviction with our identity, it's a game changer for us. It really is. And even even if people may not like your identity, if you're uh, if you're hooked into it and living that, and the big word we like to use is authentically. Part of the reason authenticity is such a problem in our culture today, people don't know what they are to be authentic with. It's hard to be authentic when you don't know and you're still guessing. And so, as we can understand our identity and go through the effort to gain initial understanding, and what Anton said a little bit back is that it's not a we get there once and done and move forward, because our circumstances change and we need to see how they are factoring and respond. Plus, circumstances may help us refine our understanding of our identity. And so, good effort and ongoing effort is a very important part of that.
One final question looks like from Zaid there. Does conviction equal identity? Um, I'll say no. Conviction is what fortifies identity,
Mm,
right? I don't think that it equals that. Identity is, like I said, it's who we are at the foundation. It's just labeling those 5 to 8 to 10 things, whatever it may be. You can't get too many. If you get too many, it's just you can't keep track of them. But really labeling and defining those things, and then painting a picture of what they are. Conviction helps us to stand in the face of challenges, stand in the face of people that are different from our identity, and not feeling like we're wrong, not feeling like we have to change that and become something else. That's just my take on it.
I like your explanation, Anton. I agree with it. Conviction is not our identity, but it is essential for us to be able to live our identity. And that's the place of where confidence comes. When we have conviction of who we are and understand our identity, then we're walk confidently in it. And also, that almost sounds like, well, I've figured it out and arrived. No, the value of conviction about our identity is it puts us in a place to be able to then go and learn and grow related to it without feeling threatened. If we have a conviction about our identity, then we become in a much better place to do something about areas where we need to grow without worrying that we have somehow our value or our worth is gone because we've been doing something in a way that shouldn't be done. Doesn't matter. Our worth, our value doesn't change as a result of growth.
Coming back to the analogy of the oak tree, that I mentioned earlier, to that point of conviction. Conviction is not the roots. The roots are the identity, but conviction is the depth of those roots and the thickness of the tree trunk. Right?
Mm,
Like, think of it that way. So when a storm comes, when a big storm that challenges your identity, a life event comes that challenges your identity, if those roots are not deep, if that tree trunk isn't thick, you're gonna fall over, and you're gonna be more like the tumbleweed versus the oak tree that we talked about.
yeah. All right. Well, good conversation. Appreciate everyone being here today. Hope that you begin to consider, do you understand and have conviction about who you are? What is your identity? If you don't, look for ways to understand it. If you need help specifically with some ways to go about it, Anton, myself, we have coached people in regards to this and are available for that for others. And so sometimes we need someone that will come in from the outside and help us find ours, not tell us what it is, but help us truly find it. So have a blessed week. It's been great. Good to see everyone. Good to hear from everyone. Look forward to next week where we are going to talk about leadership qualities. Is that what a good way to sum it up, Anton?
Yep.
So we'll be back with episode 110, and we will be talking about leadership qualities. And till then, have a blessed week, and we will see you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.